What if I told you that a single video, never meant for the public eye, could destroy a prince's reputation forever? Imagine a royal family already fractured by betrayals, secrets, and whispered power plays, suddenly torn apart by proof that one of its own may have crossed the most unthinkable line, trying to tamper with the will of Queen Elizabeth herself. That's not a rumor. That's not idle gossip. According to palace insiders, Princess and released private footage that shows Prince Harry in a compromising moment during what was supposed to be a reconciliation visit with his father, King Charles, at Clarence House. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And that changes everything. Because let's be clear, a monarch's will isn't just a legal document. It's a legacy. It's the final chapter of a reign that lasted 70 years. It's the codex of continuity that ties the living royals to centuries of tradition and to the British people. And to imagine someone, anyone, but especially a grandson, attempting to alter it, that strikes at the very foundation of royal duty, loyalty, and trust. But let's rewind for a moment. Why would Harry, a man who has so publicly distanced himself from the firm, feel the need to meddle in what the Queen left behind? Could this really be about money? Or was it about something deeper? Power, revenge, perhaps even Meghan Markle's influence? And why would Princess Anne, of all people, decide that the world needed to see this? Hold on to those questions, because over the next hour, we're going to pull apart every piece of this royal scandal. The secret meeting, the hidden footage, the shocking betrayal, the ripple effect across the monarchy. But before we even touch the footage itself, we have to understand the stakes. The Queen's will is sealed. By law and tradition, its details are locked away for at least 90 years after her death. Only a handful of people have ever seen it. The public won't know who inherited what for generations. But make no mistake, what's inside that will isn't just personal wealth. It's power, privilege, and security. For Harry, who walked away from the monarchy, that document could mean everything. And yet, the very act of attempting to interfere with it is not only scandalous, it's potentially criminal. So here's the question. Was this really desperation? Or was it calculation? Now, picture Clarence House on that day. Harry arrives, the son returning to face his father. Cameras outside captured his tight jaw, the way he avoided eye contact with photographers. Inside, the palace was bracing for reconciliation. King Charles, weary and increasingly ill at ease with constant family drama, hoped that maybe, just maybe, this meeting would be a step toward peace. But what unfolded behind those walls was something else entirely. Because while Harry was speaking of peace, something in his actions betrayed him. And Anne, ever the watchful sister, noticed. She saw the unease. She saw the subtle movements. And she knew something wasn't right. Here's what makes this story even more gripping. Princess Anne is not known for games. She is not flashy. She doesn't court headlines. She is the worker bee of the royal hive. The one who carries duty like a badge of honor. And when she saw something out of line, she did not hesitate to act. Imagine her face, stone cold, as she quietly ensured that the palace's security recordings captured everything. At the time, perhaps even Harry didn't realize. But Anne understood the gravity. And later, when the footage came to light, she made a choice. A choice not to protect Harry, but to protect the monarchy. Now, why release it? Why risk scandal? Perhaps because silence was no longer an option. Perhaps because, and more than anyone else, knows that the monarchy survives not on secrets, but on the illusion of trust and integrity. Think about it. If you were Princess Anne, watching your nephew move in ways that suggested betrayal of your mother's final wishes, would you keep quiet? Or would you act, knowing history might judge you harshly if you didn't? This is where the story takes a darker turn. Because once the footage leaked, it wasn't just about Harry anymore. It wasn't just about one act. It became a symbol of everything wrong between Harry and the rest of the family. And let's not forget, the Queen's will itself had already been a topic of speculation. Who got what? Did Harry and Meghan feature in it at all? Or were they cut out after their dramatic exit from royal life? The silence from Buckingham Palace on those questions only fueled more curiosity. So when Anne's footage surfaced, it felt like confirmation of the darkest whispers, that Harry wasn't just estranged. He was willing to cross a sacred line to claw something back. But here's the twist. The Real story isn't just what Harry may have done. It's what this act revealed about the fractures within the monarchy. Because in that moment, Charles wasn't just a king. He was a father, torn between protecting his son and protecting the crown. William wasn't just a brother. He was the heir, watching his siblings' every misstep drag the family name through mud. And Anne, she wasn't just a sister. She was a guardian of legacy, making the ruthless choice to put duty over blood. Do you see now why this story matters? Why it isn't just another tabloid headline? Because if true, this moment could mark the beginning of the monarchy's greatest modern test. And yet, as shocking as all of this sounds, we haven't even begun to unpack the details of that Clarence House meeting. We haven't yet examined what Harry said, what Charles felt, or how and moved with such quiet precision. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What is more sacred in the British monarchy than the crown itself? Arguably, the only document that comes close is the private will of a reigning monarch. And when that monarch is Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-serving sovereign in British history, her will becomes not just a matter of family inheritance, but a national symbol of legacy, duty, and continuity. It is untouchable, or at least it was supposed to be. Every royal knows this. Every advisor, every private secretary, every family member, they all understand that a monarch's will is sealed away, beyond scrutiny, hidden from public debate for 90 years after the sovereign's death. That tradition has been in place for over a century. The secrecy exists for one simple reason: to preserve dignity and prevent scandal. Imagine, for a moment, if the contents of Elizabeth's will were splashed across headlines, parsed, debated, and weaponized. The monarchy thrives on mystique, and the will is part of that shroud. So why on earth would Prince Harry, the very man who has decried palace secrecy, criticized royal traditions, and accused the institution of cruelty, want to interfere with such a sacred, untouchable document? That's the central question that Princess and shocking video footage has forced us to ask. But before we even get to Harry's alleged actions, let's pause and reflect on what makes the Queen's will so powerful. Think about it. This isn't an ordinary family inheritance. This is the distribution of assets, heirlooms, and privileges tied to the most famous royal family in the world. It involves priceless jewelry, personal letters, historic estates, and trust funds that go back generations. While the crown jewels themselves are not privately owned and cannot be passed down, the Queen's personal collection, from brooches to paintings, from racehorses to estates like Balmoral and Sandringham, could all be included. Now, here's the shocking part. The Queen's personal fortune was estimated to be worth hundreds of millions. Some analysts place it as high as £500 million. And though the monarchy has institutional wealth, the Crown Estate, Duchy of Lancaster, and so forth, those assets are not privately owned. What Elizabeth could directly bequeath was her personal wealth, the things she could give to her children, grandchildren, and even trusted staff. But here's where the emotional weight comes in. This isn't just about pounds and pence. This is about legacy. Who receives what tells you everything about who was trusted, who was valued, and who was shut out. Now, if you're Prince Harry, watching from afar after leaving the monarchy in a blaze of controversy, wouldn't you wonder where you stand? Wouldn't you fear that after years of estrangement, criticism, and tell-all interviews, your name might be quietly erased from your grandmother's final wishes? The thought alone is explosive, and according to Palace Whispers, that's exactly what gnawed at Harry. But let's go even deeper. Why is tampering with the will considered almost unthinkable? Because in royal history, a monarch's will has occasionally been a weapon. Some wills have contained surprises, secret bequests, and decisions that shocked heirs. For instance, the will of Queen Mary, the Queen's grandmother, ensured that her jewels were divided strategically, reinforcing bonds within the family. Other monarchs used wills to secure loyalty or punish those who fell out of favor. Elizabeth's will, though sealed, was believed to have contained similar strategic distributions. And remember, Meghan and Harry's departure, their refusal to return to royal duties, their televised criticisms, all of it happened before Elizabeth's passing. Which raises the most tantalizing question: did she cut them out? Did she reduce their inheritance? Did she redirect what might have gone to Harry toward William, or even her great-grandchildren? That is the ghost that haunts this scandal. Now, let's turn the lens back to Anne. Why would she risk exposing footage that ties her own nephew to such a shameful act? Because for Anne, Duty outweighs family. She has always been the one to preserve tradition. And she knew, perhaps better than anyone, that tampering with Elizabeth's will, even the mere appearance of it, could shatter the monarchy's credibility if left unchecked. This is why the footage is so damning. Because it doesn't just show a grandson acting out of desperation. It suggests betrayal. It suggests that Harry, who claimed to value authenticity and truth, may have tried to manipulate one of the most sacred traditions left by the Queen. Let's pause for a moment. Put yourself in Harry's shoes. Imagine you feel isolated, criticized, branded a traitor to your own family. You've built a new life overseas, but whispers follow you everywhere. Will Harry and Meghan be written out of the will? Did the Queen leave him nothing? Would the temptation to know, and maybe to interfere, be too great to resist? That's what makes this story so gripping. It isn't just about law or tradition. It's about human weakness, about fear, about the lengths to which someone might go when they believe they've lost everything. But let me leave you with this. The Queen's will was meant to be untouchable, and yet here we are, speaking of it as though its sanctity has already been violated. And if one grandson could shake its integrity, what does that say about the future of the monarchy itself? Because as shocking as this all sounds, the most explosive part is yet to come. Because Harry's visit to Clarence House, that so-called reconciliation meeting, wasn't about peace at all. It was about opportunity. And what unfolded next was caught on camera, hidden away, until Princess Anne made the fateful decision to let the world see. But what exactly happened inside Clarence House that day? That's where this story takes its most dramatic turn, and the footage begins to speak for itself. What do you picture when you hear the words, reconciliation meeting? You imagine handshakes, softened voices, apologies perhaps, maybe even the beginnings of healing between people who've been divided for too long. That's certainly how the palace wanted to present it. A quiet, private meeting between King Charles and his estranged son, Prince Harry, within the dignified walls of Clarence House. But was it truly about reconciliation? Or was something much darker at play? Let's set the stage. It was late afternoon in London. Clarence House, Charles's official residence as Prince of Wales and now still favored as king, stood as it always does, stately, timeless, a symbol of continuity amidst chaos. Outside its gates, the world carried on, unaware that inside, the royal family's deepest tensions were about to boil over. Prince Harry arrived not in triumph, not with the swagger of a royal son returning home, but with something else in his step. Witnesses described him as tense, shoulders tight, jaw clenched. Cameras snapped, but he barely looked up. No waves, no smiles, only the faintest acknowledgement of those who shouted his name. And King Charles? Inside, waiting in a grand but understated drawing room, the monarch wrestled with a storm of emotions. Here was his second son, the boy who once clung to his hand at Diana's funeral, the young man who had stood beside him on countless balcony appearances, but also the man who had left, who had spoken harsh truths, or half-truths, to the world, who had embarrassed the family, and who now was returning with God knows what intentions. It was supposed to be a meeting about peace, about bridging the chasm, and yet, nothing about it felt peaceful. Now let's not forget who else was there. Princess Anne, ever the watchful eye, was close at hand. She wasn't in the room at every moment, but she made her presence known. She hovered, she listened, and crucially, she ensured the palace's surveillance was properly in place. It wasn't paranoia, it was precaution, and had seen enough scandals, enough betrayals, enough mistakes to know this meeting had to be documented. So when Harry walked in, Charles greeted him warmly, or tried to. But according to those who later whispered about the encounter, Harry's eyes darted to the corners of the room, his voice lowered, his body language jittery. He was not the picture of a man eager for reconciliation. "Father," he reportedly began, in a tone that carried more tension than affection. Charles, weary, replied with what might have been a sigh disguised as patience. "Harry, I'm glad you came." The two sat down. Silence stretched. A silence that carried years of pain. Diana's absence, Charles's remarriage, Harry's anger at Camilla, the explosive Oprah interview, Spare, the Netflix series. Every word unsaid hung heavy between them. And then, slowly, the conversation began. Harry spoke of wanting peace. He mentioned the children, Archie and Lilibet, and how they deserved to know their grandfather. He spoke of Meghan, painting her as misunderstood, vilified unfairly. Charles nodded, listening, perhaps half believing, perhaps simply too tired to argue. But beneath the surface, something else simmered. Because at some point, Harry's eyes flicked toward a locked cabinet. That detail, insignificant to most, was not insignificant to Princess Anne. She noticed. And what she noticed, she did not forget. Let's stop here and ask a question. What is reconciliation worth if it's mixed with ulterior motives? Can peace be genuine if one side is already thinking ahead to documents, legacies, wills? For Charles, this was about family. For Harry, it seemed, it might have been about something more. The meeting dragged on. Tones rose, softened, then rose again. At moments, Charles's frustration bled through. "Harry, you've made choices," he allegedly said, his voice firm, kingly. "You cannot have it both ways. Duty abandoned cannot be reclaimed when convenient." Harry, bristling, shot back, "I'm still your son. I'm still the Queen's grandson. That doesn't vanish." And therein lay the heart of it. Harry wanted recognition, perhaps even entitlement, but Charles was drawing lines. By this point, Princess Anne's suspicions were sharper than ever. She caught sight of Harry moving closer to a desk, his hand brushing over folders, his eyes searching in ways that were subtle but not invisible. Was he nervous? Was he desperate? Or was he planning? The meeting ended, at least on the surface, as meetings often do, with handshakes, with forced civility. But the warmth was gone. It was performance more than peace. And as Harry departed Clarence House, those who watched him noticed something else. He didn't leave looking lighter, as one might after reconciliation. He left looking heavier, angrier, his jaw still tight, his movements brisk. Almost as though the meeting hadn't soothed him, but frustrated him even more. Now, ask yourself, if this truly had been about peace, why did Princess Anne feel compelled to ensure there was evidence of what happened? Why did she trust the cameras more than her nephew? The answer lies in what happened after. Because while Harry thought he was leaving with dignity intact, the palace was already whispering, already replaying the footage, already questioning his motives. And soon, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was a storm. Because Clarence House that day wasn't a reconciliation table. It was a trapdoor, and Harry, knowingly or unknowingly, had stepped right onto it. But here's the real cliffhanger. Princess Anne hadn't yet revealed her trump card. The footage. The moment Harry, in his quiet desperation, betrayed himself. And when that footage came out, it would not only shake Clarence House. It would shake the monarchy itself. Every royal family has its figure of quiet strength. The one who rarely makes headlines, but without whom the entire institution might crumble. For the House of Windsor, that figure has always been Princess Anne. She is the monarch's only daughter, the one who inherited her mother's work ethic, her sense of stoicism, and her uncompromising loyalty to duty. Unlike her brothers, unlike even her nephews, and has never played games with the crown. She has no time for vanity, no taste for drama, no patience for scandal. She works, she serves, she protects. And in this story, it is and who emerges as the silent guardian, the one who saw through Harry's words, who noticed his movements, and who ultimately decided the world had to know the truth. But why Anne? Why her? And not Charles, not William, not Camilla. To answer that, we need to look at who Anne has always been. From the earliest days of her royal life, Anne was different. She wasn't glamorous like Diana. She wasn't charismatic like her mother. She wasn't dramatic like her brothers. She was blunt, disciplined, and fiercely private. To many, she seemed cold, even severe. But behind that exterior was something the monarchy desperately needed: consistency, and has long been considered the most reliable royal, carrying out hundreds of engagements a year, often with little fanfare, rarely with scandal. She has endured kidnappings, divorces, remarriages, public scrutiny, and through it all, she has remained unshakable. If the Queen was the crown, and was the steel underneath it. So when Harry walked into Clarence House that day, and was already alert, she had no illusions. She didn't believe, as Charles might have, in the fantasy of reconciliation. She didn't cling, as William did, to the hope of a brother's redemption. She saw Harry for what he had become: unpredictable, restless, and potentially dangerous to the monarchy's integrity. And knew this wasn't just another family meeting. This was a test. Here's what makes her role so fascinating. and has never been one to meddle. She doesn't thrive on inserting herself into drama, but she does intervene when duty demands it. And in that moment, watching her nephew in Clarence's house, she understood the stakes. Why? Because, and, perhaps more than anyone else, understood the value of the Queen's will. Remember, Anne was Elizabeth's daughter. She knew the sacrifices her mother had made, the weight she carried, the legacy she wanted to protect, and herself had accepted a life without grandeur. She chose not to give her children titles, deliberately raising them outside the royal spotlight. Why? Because for Anne, duty always outweighed privilege. Now, imagine watching your nephew, a man who had already walked away from duty, who had already criticized the family on a global stage, start acting suspiciously around the legacy your mother left behind. Would you stay silent? Or would you act? And acted. She ensured that Clarence's house's cameras were functioning, positioned, ready. She made subtle adjustments. She arranged for the room to be covered from angles that, perhaps, Harry never considered. Because Harry, for all his mistrust of the palace, may have underestimated Anne. And when the meeting ended, and Harry left with his jaw tight and his eyes stormy, and didn't breathe a sigh of relief, she went straight to the footage. Picture the scene. Anne, sitting alone, reviewing the tapes, watching her nephew's subtle moves, his eyes flicking toward a cabinet, his fingers brushing papers that weren't his. Watching, perhaps, the moment that betrayed him, a moment so small it could be dismissed as nothing by some, but that too and revealed everything. She would have been stone-faced. No visible anger, no outward shock. That isn't Anne's way. But inside, she would have known. This couldn't stay hidden. And here's the part that chills you. And didn't immediately rush to Charles. She didn't storm into William's chambers or whisper to courtiers. She waited. She considered. She weighed her options. Because she knew that releasing this footage would not just damage Harry. It would open a wound in the monarchy that might never close. But in the end, she chose duty. She chose loyalty to her mother's legacy over loyalty to her brother's son. That's who Anne is. The silent guardian. The protector who rarely speaks, but when she does, her words, or her actions, carry the weight of centuries. Think about it. What other royal could have done this? Charles was too conflicted, too torn between love and crown. William was too emotional, too angry. Camilla, too controversial. But Anne had nothing to prove, nothing to gain, nothing to lose. She was the one person who could take this step and be believed. And when she finally released the footage, it wasn't just a personal decision. It was an act of preservation. To protect the monarchy from whispers, to shield her mother's will from suspicion, to ensure that history would remember the Queen's legacy untainted. Of course, that doesn't mean it was easy. Imagine the weight of exposing your own nephew. Imagine knowing that the world would see him not as a grieving grandson, not as a misunderstood exile, but as a man caught in the act of betraying his grandmother's final wishes. That is a decision that would haunt anyone. But Anne carried it without flinching. And that is why the world began to see her not just as the Princess Royal, but as the monarchy's silent protector. Yet, even Anne's calculated release of the footage couldn't prepare the palace for what came next. Because once the footage surfaced, the monarchy itself split down the middle. And the person caught in the center of it all wasn't Anne. It wasn't Charles. It wasn't even William. It was Harry, and the alleged act that Clarence's house cameras caught him doing. But what exactly did that footage show? What did Anne risk everything to expose? That's where the story takes its darkest turn yet. It is one thing to hear whispers of betrayal. It is another to see it unfold with your own eyes. And according to those who have seen the now infamous Clarence's house footage, what it captured was not the image of reconciliation, not the tender reunion of a father and son, but something else entirely. A prince allegedly attempting to meddle with the most sacred document in the monarchy, Queen Elizabeth II's will. The footage itself begins innocently enough. Harry and Charles seated across from one another, an awkward air filling the room. The cameras, hidden but always present in such high-security spaces, capture every angle, every twitch of a hand, every darting glance. At first, the scene looks mundane. The son nervously gesturing as he talks, the father nodding, weary. But then the rhythm changes. Harry shifts in his chair. His body leans forward ever so slightly. His eyes flick toward the sideboard where a locked cabinet stands. His fingers tap nervously against his knee. To an untrained eye, These are minor tics, the signs of an anxious man. But Princess Anne, reviewing the tapes later, saw them for what they were, tells. Subtle signals of intent. Here's the first shocking moment. As Charles rises briefly, perhaps to pour water or retrieve a document, Harry's attention visibly sharpens. His head turns fully toward the cabinet. His posture straightens. For the span of just a few seconds, he stares at it. Not casually, not idly, but intently, as though he knows what might be inside. Now, of course, Clarence House does not casually leave the Queen's while lying about. These documents are under the strictest protection. But here's the implication. Harry seemed to know exactly where sensitive materials were kept. Did someone tell him? Did he learn it years ago, in the days when Clarence House was his second home? Or was he simply guessing, hoping? Moments later, the footage shows Harry rising. He doesn't stride. He moves slowly, cautiously, as if not to draw attention. His hand brushes the surface of the desk, his fingers grazing the corner of a folder. His other hand lingers near the locked drawer, a gesture almost too quick to notice. He leans over, scanning the pages left on top. Not his papers, not his place. And yet there he is, sifting, searching. Stop for a moment. Put yourself in his shoes. You're standing in Clarence House, the home of your father the king, the palace of your grandmother's memory. You've publicly renounced your royal duties, traded your heritage for a life in California. And now, you find yourself in a room where whispers say the Queen's final wishes are hidden. Would temptation gnaw at you? Would you think, what if my name is missing? What if I've been erased? That is what makes this moment so haunting. It is the raw image of desperation. According to those who've analyzed the footage, Harry's lips move as he mutters something under his breath. Words unclear, but tone urgent. He shuffles one or two loose sheets. He pauses, hand hovering as if considering. But just as quickly, Charles re-enters the frame. Harry straightens, steps back, slides into his chair with a practiced casualness. The mask slips back on. But for Anne, watching later, the mask was already broken. And here's the most chilling detail. The cabinet that Harry eyed was known to contain not just correspondence, but draft notes related to succession planning. Sensitive materials. Nothing that a son should ever be rifling through without explicit permission. And didn't have to imagine. She saw it. She replayed the footage. She noticed the rhythm, the quiet calculation, the deliberate movements, the way Harry's eyes burned with something more than curiosity. Now, to Harry's defenders, this could be explained away. He was nervous. He was pacing. He was restless during a tense conversation. But ask yourself, does a nervous man glance repeatedly at a locked cabinet? Does he shuffle through private folders the moment his father leaves the room? This wasn't nervousness. This was opportunity. And this is where the allegation of tampering grows teeth. Because even if Harry never managed to touch the will itself, the intent is there. The footage reveals motive. A man looking where he should not look. A prince drawn not to his father's eyes, but to his grandmother's legacy. Princess Anne, in her blunt way, interpreted it as betrayal. She did not embellish. She did not dramatize. She simply revealed what the cameras caught. And in doing so, she forced the world to see Harry in a new light. Not as the victim he so often painted himself, but as an opportunist, maybe even a would-be saboteur of his grandmother's wishes. The palace, of course, remains silent on whether the Queen's will includes Harry or Meghan. By tradition, we won't know for decades. But the mere fact that Harry appeared so desperate to know, or worse, to alter, raises the most dangerous question of all. What was he afraid of finding? Think about it. If Harry believed he had been written out, wouldn't that explain his urgency? If Meghan worried they had been cut off, wouldn't that explain the tension in their California life? And if Harry feared his children were excluded, wouldn't that explain his reckless need to see what the Queen had left behind? This isn't just a scandal about papers and cabinets. This is about legacy, about a grandson who may have felt abandoned, about a monarchy struggling to protect itself from within. And the footage, once leaked, became a symbol. People didn't see just a man near a drawer. They saw a grandson allegedly trying to rewrite history. But the story doesn't end here. Because the footage itself was only the beginning. The real explosion came when Princess Anne decided that this footage could not stay buried. That if Harry was willing to cross this line, then silence would only embolden him. And when the footage was revealed, the first man to see it, The one whose heart would break the most was King Charles. But how did Charles react when he saw his own son caught in the act? That's where this story takes its most tragic turn. There are moments in history when a single piece of evidence changes everything. A letter, a photograph, a recording. And in the digital age of monarchy, it was footage captured by silent cameras, guarded by walls that had seen centuries of secrets, that detonated the bombshell. Princess Anne's decision to release that footage was not just an act of exposure. It was an act of defiance against silence, against corruption, against the slow erosion of trust in the monarchy. But let us slow down and imagine the scene for ourselves. It begins in a private screening room within Clarence House. Princess Anne, seated in her usual no-nonsense posture, arms folded, eyes locked on the screen. Palace staff gather nervously. A few trusted courtiers stand by, unsure of what they're about to witness. And there, flickering onto the screen, appears Prince Harry, her nephew, Diana's boy, the soldier once admired for his courage, now captured in a frame of suspicion. The footage rolls. At first, it's mundane. Harry shifting, talking, fidgeting. Charles pouring water. But then the crucial moment comes. Charles steps away, and Harry's eyes sharpen. His body stiffens. He leans forward. He moves toward the desk. His hand grazes the drawer. His fingers touch papers. He mutters something low, something inaudible. The room watching the footage holds its breath, and does not flinch. She has seen it all already. She has replayed these moments in her mind 100 times. She knows what this looks like, and she knows what it means. When the footage finishes, silence. Then a murmur among the staff. My God. He wouldn't, would he? This can't be misunderstood. And turns, and in her calm, firm tone says, it is what it is. The truth must protect the crown. That was the moment. The instant when Anne, the monarchy's silent guardian, made her decision. She would not allow this footage to be locked away. She would not permit whispers to fester unchecked. She would release it, carefully, strategically, but undeniably. Now imagine the effect when it first surfaced. Not through tabloids, not through gossip, but through the palace's own sanctioned channels. It leaked in whispers first. There's footage, and has proof. Then, suddenly, it wasn't whispers anymore. It was headlines. Princess Anne reveals footage of Harry at Clarence House. Royal scandal. Did Harry try to interfere with the Queen's will? Betrayal or misunderstanding? Footage ignites monarchy crisis. The reaction was volcanic. Social media exploded. Clips of the footage circulated at lightning speed, each frame analyzed by millions of eyes. Some defended Harry. He was just nervous. Others condemned him outright, caught red-handed. Commentators filled airwaves. Body language experts dissected his every move. Hashtags like #HarryCaught and #AndTheProtector trended worldwide. But beyond the frenzy, the footage hit at something deeper: trust. If a prince could be caught acting this way, what else could be hidden? If Anne herself felt compelled to release it, what did that say about the fractures inside the family? And here is where the story turns from scandal to tragedy. Because the footage did not just implicate Harry. It tore at Charles's heart. Imagine being King Charles, sitting down, watching your own son on that screen. This was no rumor, no headline you could dismiss. This was your boy, caught in an act that suggested desperation, perhaps even betrayal of your mother's final wishes. How do you process that? As a king, you know the crown comes first. But as a father, you see the boy you once carried in your arms. Reports from those close to Charles say he watched the footage in stunned silence. At one point, he buried his face in his hands. At another, he muttered, "Why, Harry? What?" For Anne, there was no room for tears. For Charles, there was nothing but tears. And yet, the footage's release had a purpose. It wasn't just about exposing Harry. It was about protecting the monarchy's integrity. It was Anne's way of saying, the Queen's will must remain untouchable. The monarchy cannot afford whispers of interference. Transparency, brutal though it may be, was the only safeguard. But here's the cruel irony. In exposing Harry, Anne also exposed the monarchy itself to scrutiny. The world now debated not just Harry's actions, but the very secrecy of the Queen's will. Questions swirled. Who was included? Who was cut out? Did Harry's desperation suggest he already knew the answer? The footage was a bombshell, yes, but it was also a spark. And what it ignited was a firestorm that spread far beyond Clarence House. Because once the footage was public, there was no going back. No reconciliation. No quiet mending of wounds. Harry's reputation took a hit from which it may never recover. And Charles, forced to choose between his son and his duty, leaned further and further toward the crown. But the biggest question remained unanswered. What would Charles do next? Would he shield Harry, insist it was all a misunderstanding? Or would he take the most drastic step a king could take against his own flesh and blood? That decision, whispered behind palace walls, would shape the monarchy's future. And what Charles ultimately chose revealed just how torn he truly was, between the heart of a father and the steel of a king. A father's love is supposed to be unconditional. But what happens when that love collides with the unbending weight of a crown? That is the very torment King Charles faced the moment Princess Anne's footage became impossible to ignore. Picture him in those first few hours after the footage had been revealed. Not as the king of the United Kingdom, not as the figure who embodies centuries of monarchy, but as a father, weary, aged, carrying the scars of past mistakes, staring at a screen where his youngest son, his own blood, appears to betray the memory of Queen Elizabeth II. How do you reconcile the two halves of yourself in that moment? Do you cling to the image of Harry as the bright-eyed boy who once held Diana's hand, who laughed on Balmoral's lawns, who marched bravely in uniform? Or do you see him as the man in the footage, a disgraced duke accused of crossing a line no royal should ever dare to cross? This was Charles's crucible, the hardest test of his reign so far. Not foreign policy, not constitutional crisis, but family. His family. Let us break down the dilemma that haunted him. On one hand, there was the king, the monarch who inherited not just a throne, but an institution built on trust, tradition, and a delicate contract with the British people. For that king, the footage was intolerable. It was damning. It proved, or at least strongly suggested, that Prince Harry, the spare, turned renegade, was capable of undermining his grandmother's legacy for personal gain. To let it slide would mean weakness. To ignore it would invite whispers that even the Queen's will could be tampered with. For the monarchy, which survives as much on perception as on law, that was unthinkable. On the other hand, there was the father, the man who had already lost so much. His mother, his marriage, years of closeness with his youngest son. A man who remembered Harry as the cheeky boy who once called him Pa, with affection, who stood by him through Diana's funeral when the world looked on in pity. That father still wanted reconciliation. That father still wanted to believe his son could be forgiven. That father asked himself, if I punish him, do I lose him forever? This tug of war between crown and blood was not new for Charles. His entire life had been a balancing act between duty and emotion. But this was different. This was personal. Let's examine how he responded behind closed doors. At first, Charles is said to have refused to speak. He locked himself in his private office, watched the footage again and again, as though searching for an angle, a detail, a flicker of innocence in Harry's face. He replayed the moment where Harry's hand brushed the drawer, where his eyes flickered to the cabinet. Could it have been nothing? Could it have been nerves? Wasn't too harsh. He wanted desperately to believe so. But each time he looked, the truth weighed heavier. Reports suggest Charles called and into the room. Their conversation was terse, filled with the kind of clipped exchanges siblings who know each other too well often share. Charles, are you certain of this? And I watched it. I know what I saw. You know what it means. Charles, sighing, he is my son. And she was our mother. Which matters more? That was the dagger. The reminder that the Queen, the woman Charles had adored and obeyed his entire life, had left behind a legacy worth more than Harry's feelings. Yet, the father in him resisted. Harry has been led astray, he reportedly told aides. He is lost. He can still find his way back. But even as those words left his lips, the king in him knew. The public wouldn't forgive. The crown couldn't bend. This is where the pressure mounted from every side. William, furious and protective of both the monarchy and his mother's memory, pushed Charles toward decisive action. You cannot excuse him this time, William insisted. Advisors, lawyers, and courtiers echoed the same sentiment. If the king wavered, if he faltered, the monarchy would appear weak, divided, incapable of protecting its own sacred traditions. But Charles's heart resisted. He remembered the boy who used to race him on horseback, He remembered the little hand clutching his at Diana's burial. He remembered laughter. He remembered love. Could he truly sacrifice his son to save an institution? Here's the cruel irony. Charles had lived his whole life in his mother's shadow, waiting decades for the throne. And when he finally wore the crown, he found that it did not bring freedom. It brought chains. Chains that bound him not only to the public, but to choices that tore him apart as a father. So what did he do? For days, Charles hesitated. He neither condemned Harry nor defended him. The silence spoke louder than words. Parliament rumbled. Newspapers speculated. Public opinion grew restless. Each day of indecision eroded trust in the king. And in the end, Charles realized something devastating. By doing nothing, he risked losing both, his son and his monarchy. So he began to lean, slowly, painfully, toward the crown, toward action, toward sacrifice. The king overruled the father. But here's the haunting question. What action would he take? Would he strip Harry of his titles? Would he banish him entirely? Would he quietly cover it up but distance him forever? The answer to that question would shake not only the Windsor family, but the entire nation. Because once Charles made his choice, there would be no turning back. And just as the king prepared to act, another question began to swirl in whispers through palace halls, through parliament, through public squares. Was Harry acting alone? Or was someone else pulling the strings from behind the scenes? And that question would lead straight to Meghan Markle. When the footage broke and Harry's reputation teetered on the edge of ruin, there was one question on everyone's lips. Where was Meghan? More importantly, was she merely watching from California, stunned like the rest of us? Or was she the hidden hand guiding Harry's every move? Because if history has taught us anything about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, it's this: they rarely move without each other's influence. From the day Meghan entered Harry's life, his choices began to shift. He distanced himself from his brother, softened his stance on duty, and eventually abandoned the monarchy altogether. To many observers, Harry without Meghan seemed unthinkable. So was this Clarence House scandal truly Harry acting alone? Or was Meghan, in some way, the puppeteer behind the curtain? Let's dive deeper. In the days following the footage release, Meghan's silence was deafening. No statement, no defense, not even the carefully polished PR responses she is known for. Instead, she stayed quiet, letting Harry absorb the blow. But silence, in this case, did not read as neutrality. It read as strategy. Critics quickly seized upon it. She's distancing herself. She's waiting to see if it explodes before she speaks. Supporters, however, countered. She's protecting her children. She's refusing to feed the media machine. But let's ask the real question. What role could Meghan have played in this alleged tampering scandal? First, motive. Meghan has long been painted, fairly or unfairly, as someone keenly aware of status, wealth, and security. The Queen's will, sealed though it may be, represented all three. If Harry and Meghan were cut out, their future as global celebrities would rely entirely on their own earnings. And though they struck multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify, those deals have been shaky, plagued with criticism and cancellations. Financial security tied to the monarchy would be a prize too tempting to ignore. Second, influence. Those close to Harry have often remarked that Meghan is persuasive, that she guides his thinking. Is it truly far-fetched to imagine late-night conversations in Montecito where Meghan voiced her fears? Harry, what if she cut us out? What about Archie? What about Lilibet? They deserve to be part of her legacy. Could such words have festered in Harry's mind, driving his desperation when he returned to Clarence House? Third, history. This is not the first time Meghan has been accused of influencing Harry toward bold, even reckless decisions. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir Spare. Each of these carried revelations Harry might once have hesitated to make. Yet under Meghan's influence, he stepped forward. Why would this moment, the Queen's will, be any different? And yet, here's the twist. While critics see Meghan as the puppet master, others argue she may be an innocent bystander in this case. Consider this. Harry has always been haunted by insecurity, even before Meghan. He has long lived in William's shadow, the spare rather than the heir. His memoir is filled with bitterness about his position in the family hierarchy. His anger toward the monarchy predated Meghan. She simply gave him the courage to act on it. Could it be that Harry's alleged attempt to meddle with the Queen's will was not Meghan's idea at all, but his own lifelong resentment boiling over? There's also the possibility that Meghan, far from orchestrating, may have warned him against it. Her silence, then, could be less strategy and more resignation. Perhaps she saw what was coming but knew she couldn't stop him. Still, the public perception is brutal. Meghan has become, in the eyes of millions, the woman who led Harry astray. And in the Clarence House scandal, her name was dragged back into the mud, whether she played a role or not. Let's pause and ask the audience, what do you think? Was Meghan pulling strings, whispering in Harry's ear about what he deserved? Or was she powerless, watching her husband self-destruct under the weight of old wounds? Now, imagine Charles's torment in this light. Not only is his son implicated, but the shadow of Meghan looms over the footage. Advisors whisper, she urged him. William fumes. This is what she does. And, firm as ever, says, whether she urged him or not, Harry did it. He is responsible. The monarchy finds itself in a dangerous position. To punish Harry is to implicitly punish Meghan too. To strip titles, to distance, is to exile them both. And that, in turn, risks fueling their narrative of persecution. Meghan could easily spin this as proof of cruelty, racism, rejection. This is the heart of Charles's dilemma deepening. Protect the monarchy and destroy his son's marriage? Or remain silent and risk the monarchy's integrity collapsing under the weight of suspicion? But the public wasn't silent. In pubs, in newspapers, online forums, one question dominated: what was Meghan's role? Some saw her as Lady Macbeth to Harry's faltering Hamlet, the cunning manipulator urging him toward disaster. Others saw her as an innocent, unfairly vilified, simply caught in the tidal wave of her husband's desperation. Either way, the damage was done. Meghan's name was back in the headlines. And whether guilty or innocent, she was tied once again to the monarchy's deepest crisis since Diana. But here's the cliffhanger. If Meghan wasn't the mastermind, if she wasn't the one pulling strings, then who else might have known what Harry intended? Could it be that Harry acted entirely on impulse? Or was someone outside the family whispering in his ear too? Because as the palace soon discovered, the footage wasn't the only bombshell waiting to explode. If King Charles wrestled with the agony of a father torn between love and duty, his eldest son had no such hesitation. For Prince William, the Clarence House footage wasn't just a scandal, it was a betrayal. A betrayal so deep, so unforgivable, that it struck at the very heart of his relationship with the brother he once swore would always be by his side. To understand William's fury, you have to remember his story. He was there the day Diana died. He was there, holding Harry's hand as they walked behind their mother's coffin, the world watching. William, even as a teenager, was forced into the role of protector, of his brother, of the crown, of the monarchy's future. He bore it with silence, with stoicism, but the weight was always there. So when he saw the footage, when he watched his younger brother allegedly rifling through documents, eyes darting to the cabinet that might contain their grandmother's final wishes, the wound was personal. Because this wasn't just about the Queen's will. It was about legacy, about Diana's boys, about the promise that, despite everything, they would stand together. And in William's eyes, Harry shattered that promise. Behind closed doors, William's rage was volcanic. Palace insiders whisper that his voice rose so high, so sharp, it echoed down the corridors. He confronted Charles not with diplomacy, but with blunt, furious words. You cannot let him get away with this. He is spitting on her memory. Kate, ever the measured one, did not raise her voice. But her disapproval was no less powerful. For years, she had stood by, watching the brothers' bond fracture, watching Meghan enter the scene, watching Harry lash out in interviews and memoirs. But this was beyond words, beyond forgiveness. In private, she told William, if he would go this far, how can we ever trust him again? And here lies the core of William and Kate's anger. It wasn't just what Harry did. It was what it revealed. That he was willing to undermine their grandmother, the very woman who had anchored their family, who had guided William toward kingship. For them, it was sacrilege. Think about it. William had spent his entire life preparing for duty. Kate had molded herself into the perfect consort, poised, elegant, committed. Together, they carried the hopes of the monarchy's future. And while they toiled in silence, While they upheld the crown through scandal and criticism, Harry seemed to do the opposite. He abandoned duty, fled to California, sold family secrets for profit. And now, he was caught in what looked like an attempt to interfere with the Queen's will. To William, it was the ultimate proof. Harry wasn't just reckless. He was dangerous. Their anger, however, wasn't only personal. It was strategic. William knew the monarchy's survival depended on trust. If the public believed Harry had tried to tamper with the Queen's wishes, and the crown allowed it, faith in the institution could crumble. And so William pressed Charles. This isn't just about him. It's about the monarchy. If you don't act, we all suffer. Kate, too, weighed in with quiet force. She reminded Charles of the Queen's values: integrity, service, sacrifice. What would she have wanted, she asked. The implication was clear. Elizabeth would never have tolerated this. She would have demanded consequences. But their fury wasn't only directed at Harry. Meghan's shadow lingered, too. William, in private, reportedly accused her of fueling Harry's desperation. Kate, who had endured years of tension with Meghan, saw in this scandal a vindication of her instincts. That Meghan and Harry together were a storm the monarchy could no longer contain. Here's where the story grows more human, more painful. William didn't just see Harry as a brother anymore. He saw him as a liability. The footage forced him to draw a line in the sand. Family loyalty ended where betrayal began. And in William's eyes, Harry had crossed that line forever. Let's pause and ask. If your own sibling was caught in such an act, what would you do? Would you defend them? Insist it was a misunderstanding? Or would you protect your family's honor, even if it meant severing ties? For William, the answer was simple. For Kate, it was absolute. Harry could not be trusted again. Not in the family, not in the monarchy, not even as a brother. Their anger, however, was not kept private. Subtle leaks began to appear. Friends of William spoke to journalists. He is furious, they said. He feels betrayed. Reports surfaced that Kate was deeply disappointed, that she believed forgiveness was impossible. These leaks weren't accidental. They were part of a strategy to shape public perception, to let the world know that the future king and queen would not tolerate betrayal. And the public listened. Polls shifted. Sympathy for Harry plummeted. Support for William and Kate soared. In pubs and living rooms, conversations echoed the same sentiment. William's right. Enough is enough. But the fury in William and Kate's hearts carried another effect, one Charles could no longer ignore. Their anger became pressure. Pressure to act. Pressure to strip titles. Pressure to make an example of Harry. And yet, even as William pushed for consequences, there was something else brewing beneath the surface. Because the footage wasn't just a blow to Charles or the monarchy itself. It was also a crack in William's own heart. This wasn't just his brother caught in a scandal. This was the boy who had once been his closest ally, his partner in grief, the only other person who knew the pain of losing Diana in the way he did. And now that boy had become a stranger. So William and Kate's anger wasn't just cold fury. It was heartbreak. The heartbreak of realizing that the brother you once swore to protect had become the enemy of everything you stood for. And yet, their fury had consequences. Because as their voices grew louder, as their pressure mounted, Charles found himself cornered. The king could no longer delay. He had to choose. But before he could, another wave of division struck the monarchy. Because while William and Kate burned with fury, not everyone in the family agreed. Some whispered that Harry deserved compassion. Others said silence was safer. The palace was splitting in two. And that divide, royals choosing sides in the wake of Anne's footage, would be the next great fracture. Every royal scandal creates shockwaves. But this one tore through the palace like an earthquake. Princess Anne's release of the footage hadn't just put Harry in the spotlight. It had split the House of Windsor itself. Suddenly, there were two camps. Those who believed Harry had crossed an unforgivable line, and those who insisted that, even now, family must come before duty. For the first time since Diana's death, the royals weren't just fractured, they were openly divided. Let's paint the picture. Behind the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Windsor Castle, hushed meetings became battlegrounds. Whispers filled drawing rooms. Sides were quietly chosen. No longer was this simply Harry versus the crown. This was the crown at war with itself. On one side stood the hardliners, Princess Anne, William, and Kate. and stance was ironclad. To her, this wasn't about sympathy or reconciliation. This was about protecting the Queen's legacy. She gave her life to the crown, and reportedly told confidants, "We cannot allow her final wishes to be tarnished." Releasing the footage had been her duty. Now, ensuring consequences was the next step. William, of course, needed no convincing. To him, Harry's actions were not just betrayal, but treason against the family itself. Every ounce of his fury demanded justice. "He has chosen his path," William said bluntly. "Now he must live with the consequences." Kate echoed his view, though in softer tones, framing it less as punishment and more as protection. "If we allow this, what message does it send to the people?" Together, the three of them formed the unshakable wall of accountability. But on the other side were the moderates, and, surprisingly, they weren't few in number. Camilla, Queen Consort, was among them. Though she never had a warm relationship with Harry, she reportedly counseled Charles not to act in haste. "The boy is reckless," she said, "but he is still your son. Don't let Anne and William push you into breaking him." Camilla, always the pragmatist, knew that publicly punishing Harry could make martyrs of him and Meghan, feeding their narrative of persecution and cruelty. "Do nothing," she urged. "Let him collapse under his own weight." Then there was Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Known for their calmer temperaments, they leaned toward compassion. "Harry has always been troubled," Sophie whispered to aides. "He needs help, not destruction." Edward, who has weathered his own share of criticism in the past, advised patience. "The crown survives scandals by outlasting them. We don't need more spectacle." Even Prince Andrew, disgraced and sidelined, inserted himself into the discussion, and while his words carried little weight, they revealed another fracture. Andrew reportedly scoffed at the outrage, muttering, "They're all hypocrites. We've all made mistakes." His presence, rather than helping Harry, only deepened the disgust of the hardliners, who loathed being associated with him in any way. And then there was Charles himself, the man at the center of this tug-of-war. Torn between Anne's insistence on action, Camilla's call for restraint, William's fury, and Edward's caution, he became paralyzed. Each path seemed catastrophic. Punish Harry, and he risked losing his son forever, not to mention giving Meghan another weapon. Do nothing, and he risked appearing weak, a king unable to protect his mother's legacy. This was the palace divide. But the split didn't stop with the royals. Courtiers and staff also began whispering in factions. Some were loyal to Anne's steel. The monarchy must be strong, decisive. Others sided with Camilla. Silence will starve the scandal faster than outrage. The staff themselves were caught in the crossfire, leaking tidbits to the press, fueling the media frenzy that made the divide impossible to hide. And the public? They sensed it too. The once solid image of a united royal family began to crack. Newspapers spoke of Windsor warfare. Opinion columns painted Anne as the enforcer, William as the avenger, Charles as the dithering father, Camilla as the strategist, and Harry as the rebel now drowning in his own recklessness. Let's pause and ask, what happens to an institution built on unity when its family members can't even agree on how to treat one of their own? This divide wasn't just gossip. It was dangerous. Because the monarchy's greatest weapon is the illusion of solidarity. The moment that illusion breaks, the institution weakens. And now, for the first time in a generation, the cracks weren't just visible, they were widening by the hour. Here's where things turned even darker. Reports suggest that Anne and William began pushing behind the scenes for Parliament to weigh in. "If the king will not act," Anne allegedly said, "perhaps the government must." That meant talk of stripping Harry of his titles. The Duke of Sussex, the royal HRH, began to gain momentum outside the palace walls. And that, in turn, deepened the divide inside. Camilla warned Charles that allowing Parliament to intervene would unleash chaos. "The monarchy must govern itself," she insisted. "If we invite politicians into family matters, we lose control forever." Edward, too, cautioned against it. "Titles are not toys," he said. "If we start stripping them for scandal, where does it end?" But William wouldn't relent. Neither would Anne. Their anger, their certainty, became a relentless drumbeat. Harry must face consequences. And so, Charles found himself cornered once again. Not only did he face a personal dilemma, father versus king, But now he faced an institutional one: unity versus fracture. No matter what choice he made, one half of his family would turn against him. That is the tragedy of the palace divide. It wasn't just Harry against the monarchy. It was the monarchy against itself. Brothers against brothers. Sisters against sons. Fathers against children. And when a royal house begins to fight itself, history tells us the outcome is never clean. But as this storm brewed inside, the world outside waited for answers. And the question that echoed louder than any other was this: if Harry's actions had indeed crossed the line into tampering, what were the legal consequences? Because beyond family feuds and fractured loyalties, there was still the matter of the law. And the legal fallout, once lawyers began to weigh in, would send yet another shockwave through the monarchy.